Now that there are too many streaming services and they're getting more and more expensive, we're checking out some of the best and worst horror movies across Netflix, Amazon Prime, Shudder, Crackle, and so on to see are they worth buying a physical copy to preserve. I'm Rob from the Masters of Nonsense, and I watched Maniac Cop on Peacock. Is this movie worth streaming or buying a physical copy and owning? I'll cover this in the only way that I know how, using wrestling lingo. The Gimmick. Maniac Cop was released in 1988. Synopsis of the movie is, a killer dressed in police uniform begins murdering innocent people on the streets of New York City. One thing that I can say off the bat is that the movie definitely does deliver on its own title. There is a maniac, he's a cop, and he is pretty badass. 3 minutes and we're out of here. I have a short attention span. With little time to spare, I make my initial judgment on a movie based on the first 3 minutes of the film. And the first 3 minutes of Maniac Cop are pretty incredible to me. So I knew nothing about this movie going in. I actually didn't even read the description of the film before I hit play. And then here's what happens. We have a cop that is getting dressed up in his uniform. You can't really see his face or anything. And as he's doing certain things, credits would roll and it would pause on the screen. So, much to my surprise, the first name that pops up and is paused on is Tom Atkins, star of one of the greatest movies of all time, Halloween 3. I almost jumped off my couch. The second name that it stops on, Bruce Campbell, of course from Evil Dead and just about any B-rated horror movie you can imagine. It's another one of my favorites, so I'm sold on this movie, beyond sold, and the first 3 minutes of this film really hooked me. Only because I knew nothing about this movie going in. The rest of this ends up being that you see the guy getting dressed, and that's about it. But I'm in. I need to see this. I need to watch it, and I'm probably gonna like it. Rest hold. And there's where my excitement ends up falling off. Unfortunately, this movie does not live up to my hype that I created in my head. So this movie does have some cool high spots, but it's pretty boring in between. Let me just go over a couple of my favorite things that did happen. So my favorite kill in this movie is when our titular cop ends up handcuffing an innocent person, and he drags him over and suffocates him in wet cement, which I thought was pretty creative. And then this dude is super powerful. He's just tossing people around and he's snapping people's necks with his own bare hands. And then I do need to call out one thing. I have to give major props to the closed captions people, because when they were putting this together and scribing it, they must have been having a great time. But ultimately, the movie did not live up to any of the hype. Outside of those few scenes that I mentioned, this movie is pretty boring. The whole story is oddly told too, because aside from those random innocent people that our maniac does end up killing, there isn't a decent human being here at all. Sure, that might be part of the social commentary that is being told around the police, but without a face here, there really isn't anybody to root for. On top of that, the police force is incredibly dumb in here. We have Tom Atkins, who is supposed to be our lead detective on the case, and he is just oblivious to everything that's going on. He's investigating his own precinct, and most names that come up to him, he has no idea who they are. He looks confused as hell when somebody says, "Hey, why don't you talk to this person?" "Who's that?" "I don't know." "Oh, they just work right in front of you." And it was just going on, and that was a common theme throughout. Then let me get this spoiler out of the way. The Maniac Cop is not Bruce Campbell. What ends up happening is Bruce has some issues with his wife, and she ends up being one of the victims of the Maniac Cop. So the commissioner tries to wrap up the case as quickly as possible and pegs it on Bruce. But remember when I said that this killer was all powerful and he was just tossing bodies around? You really think Bruce Campbell can do that? Not only was the commissioner convinced, but the entire police force. It's amazing to me. I do have to give props to Bruce though, because he goes from being the lead suspect to the lead detective on this case when Tom Atkins gets tossed out of a window. But that's really it for this movie. It's a slasher and zombie movie, yet spends majority of its time being a very boring detective movie. It honestly felt like they had some really cool ideas for some kills, and then they found that they had to write a whole movie in between, and then just got lost and did this without a care. The Big Leg. Maniac Cop certainly wasn't revolutionary, but I guess enough people saw it and loved it to spawn 2 extra movies in this series, making it a Maniac Cop franchise. And from the looks of it, Maniac Cop 2, which came out straight to video 2 years after the original movie was released, is one of the more beloved movies in the series. As a horror lover myself, this movie only hit my radar because I would see the title on some merch sites, and it seemed like it had some cult status, but I rarely saw it talked about anywhere. And that's probably for good reason. Going Home. I watched Maniac Cop on Peacock, and at the time of my viewing, the movie is also available on Pluto TV, Tubi, Redbox, Crackle, the Roku channel, Amazon Prime, and AMC+. This movie is not hard to find by any means. On Peacock, the ads were front-loaded, so it was an uninterrupted watch for me. I can only imagine what would happen if I did watch this with ad breaks though. If I did, I can see myself going to grab a snack during one of the breaks, and forgetting to come back to the TV because I didn't even realize that the movie was on. Maybe that's an attention span issue for me, or this really was that bad. So why don't we just see what you would get if you were to buy this movie on Blu-ray right now. We have Maniac Cop Memories, interview with the Maniac Cop himself, Out the Window, an interview with Tom Atkins, 3 Minutes with Danny Hicks, an animated promotional art gallery, additional scenes filmed for Japanese television, theatrical trailers, and a Spanish radio spot. I did pop for Out of the Window with Tom Atkins and 3 Minutes with Danny Hicks, of course, but not enough for me to warrant a purchase here. This was my first and last time watching Maniac Cop. I am slightly interested in Maniac Cop 2, but I'm more inclined to forget that it exists than actually look it up and watch. If you want some random violence in very short spurts, seek this movie out on any streaming service you can find, because it will be there. But I cannot recommend actually spending money on this movie or having it take up any shelf space in your home. So between stream or own this movie, you gotta stream Maniac Cop. Let's call for the bell because now we have our decision. This movie did not take a spot on the official Masters of Nonsense movie shelf. Are you thinking about getting this movie? Do you think the decision should be overturned? Let us know by joining the discussion on our Threads page and all of our other social media available on the screen. Like, subscribe, repeat. Always repeat.